Hey everybody, today I want to make a video that's kind of a part two. Part one I made I think like about a month ago, where I talked about the Beatles album Rubber Soul, and specifically the 1965 stereo mix and the 1987 stereo mix. And so for those of you who don't really know about how this whole thing came about, how there was a 65 stereo mix and an 87 stereo mix, I would advise you all to go back to my previous video, and you can watch a very detailed explanation as to how these two different mixes came about. But today I'm going to talk about the Help album, and as I go along I will mention some of the details and the reasons why there is a 65 mix and the 87 stereo mix. Now, as I'm showing you right now, this record right here is a 1969 pressing of a stereo pressing, UK, of the Beatles Help album that has the 65 stereo mix on it. And this is from 2012, based off the 2009 digital remasters. It comes in the big black vinyl box. So this has the 1987 stereo mix on it. And this is the one that's the most readily available. So like all of the digital versions of Help, almost all of them, 90% of them, are based off the 1987 stereo mix. You can, of course, get the original 65 stereo mix on the Beatles mono box set, CD box set, and that gets a little bit confusing, but again, you can watch one of my previous videos where I talk about that as well. But what I want to do is talk about the main differences between the original 65 stereo mix and the 87 stereo mix, much like I did for Rubber Soul. So first off, let's talk about the biggest, most obvious differences between these two. So first off, the 1965 mix has a very, very different reverb sound to it. It has original analog reverb that we all know, well, at least I think we all know. If you're a big Beatle fan, you listen to a lot of Beatles albums a lot, you get very used to that analog reverb sound. Now, the 87 remix has digital reverb, and it's got a little bit more reverb as well. And some people like this, some people don't. I'm in the camp where I don't mind it all that much, but I definitely prefer the original 65 reverb sound. The other thing that I just mentioned is that the 87 remix has just a lot more reverb. And when I say a lot more, I actually shouldn't say a lot more, but it definitely has more reverb than the original stereo mix. Now, I will say right off the bat that when I made my Rubber Soul video, I talked about how I preferred the Rubber Soul reverb, the original 65 reverb, a lot more than the 87 mix. For Help, I actually there are times where I actually kind of enjoy a little bit of the reverb on the 87 remix, just because it seems to kind of suit some of the songs a bit more. Songs like Yesterday, I've Just Seen a Face, it kind of sets more of a mood for those songs, although I will say that I don't like the digital element to that. I would prefer if they would have had more reverb, but using the original analog reverb that they had at Abbey Road in 1965. So reverb, when it comes to the reverb battle, I still will always go with the original 65 as far as the overall reverb sound, but I do like some of the choices made on this mix right here. Now, as for the songs, there isn't as much of a difference, in my opinion, between the 65 and the 87 mix as far as the stereo mix goes. Yes, George Martin did tend to put the vocals and the bass, when he could, he put it more towards the center for the 87 mix. But I generally, when it comes to just the overall mix, I prefer still the original 65 mix. There's just something magical about this one. It just works more. I don't know if it's if I'm just tricking myself into thinking that just because it's the original 65 mix, that's why I like it. But if I really did A-B the two, which I did, by the way, I always seem to like the 65 original stereo 65 mix. It just sounds better to me. And what's kind of interesting about that is that I actually grew up with the 87 mix. This is the one that I'm a lot more accustomed to because I bought the CD when it came out in 87, 88. I think that was around the time it came out. I didn't buy it in 87 or 88, but I bought it like in the early 90s. And that's the one I grew up with. That's the sound of Help that I'm used to hearing. And so eventually when I picked up a copy of the original 65 mix, it was quite a bit different to my ears. So when it comes to what I grew up with, what I was accustomed to, the 87 mix, over time, I really found that I really preferred the 65 mix as far as just the overall sound. And it just had more of that, because it is, that vintage 60s Beatles album sound. And I really think it's the winner here when you compare the two. Now, I will say that there are a couple of differences that I've noticed that are kind of big differences in the mix and the overall sound of certain songs. And the biggest one for me is Ticket to Ride. So Ticket to Ride on the original 65 mix, it has a lot more low end is what I would say. But it's a little bit confusing because when I say it has a lot more low end, I would say it has a lot more low end in like the drums. You can really hear the kick drum pretty good. The bass, of course, and just the guitars and the tone of the vocals, the quality of vocals. It's got a lot more low end. Now, the 87 remix actually has more bass. When I say just the bass guitar, Paul's bass, it is a little bit louder in the mix, but as far as the actual EQ goes, the overall low end, there isn't quite as much overall low end on the 87 remix. And you can really tell between the two if you A-B them. So, of course, when it comes to that, I would prefer the 65 stereo mix of Ticket to Ride, just because it's got an overall more low end and a more natural sound is how I would describe it. Other differences, like I previously mentioned, is that on Yesterday, the song Yesterday, there's a lot more reverb going on the 87 mix that compared to the original 65 stereo. The original 65 stereo is there is reverb on there, but it's a lot more dry, and I kind of tend to prefer, oddly enough, the 87 mix of Yesterday, just because I think that's the one I grew up with, and I'm just so used to hearing it with that extra bit of reverb that it sounds a little bit kind of naked and dry on the original 65 mix. But really, when it comes down to it, compared to Rubber Soul, there aren't as many black and white differences between the 65 Help and the 87 Help stereo mix. It's really just a matter of preference as to which one you prefer. And like I said, for me, if I had to choose between the two, I'd go with the original 65 mix, but I'm happy to have both because both are excellent. It's the Beatles, it's the Help album. I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. Now, the big problem, though, that I find with these albums is that you can definitely, in my opinion, it seems like there's a lot more, how can I describe this? The fidelity is, there's a lot more fidelity, there's a lot more to hear, a lot more to kind of like process and take in, and almost like you can kind of see into the music a lot more when it comes to the original 65 mix. And there's a reason for this. This comes from the original analog master tapes, of course, and of course it was cut and pressed in the 1960s. This happens to be a 1969 pressing. And unfortunately, like Rubber Soul, the 87 mix of Rubber Soul and of Help, and we'll talk about Help in this instance, it comes from a DAT master. Now, George Martin in the mid-'80s was using, at that time, cutting-edge technology. So when he went to make the digital master, he made it, there's a seagull flying around, he had it bounce down to DAT. Now, DAT at the time was that, like I said, the industry standard, and so that was fine for what he was doing then. Problem with DAT is, at that time, the best it could do was 16-bit quality. Now, 16-bit is okay because almost 90% of the CDs available even to this day are in 16-bit. That is the highest bit rate that they can produce. Of course, there are super CDs that can be in 24-bit, but 16-bit is okay when it comes to that. But the big problem here, though, is that in 2009, when they went to make the digital remasters, they used that DAT stereo remix as their source material when they could have been using the original analog tapes like they did for the other albums and gotten a much better quality. Now, I don't quite understand what they were thinking when they did this, but they decided to go with those 16-bit DAT masters. And, 90% of people probably don't notice the difference between the fidelity of the remasters and the original. But for the other 10% that do, or for me, and I gotta say by the way, that I'm not one of those people who has this like amazing ear where someone can play me something I've never heard before, and I can tell you like, oh, that's that was recorded on 24-track tape, mastered here, blah blah blah. It takes me a while to process audio and just kind of really take it all in and figure out what's going on. So for me, the reason I'm able to discern between the two is just because I've listened to this album and Beatles music over and over and over almost my whole life, that I'm able to tell the little differences. And I can really tell like I said, the overall quality of the audio from the 65 original from the 65 stereo masters compared to the 87 digital masters. There is a difference there, and I think that's really important because when it comes to Beatles, you want the best, and especially when they're going to make the definitive versions of these albums like Help and Rubber Soul, like they did in 2009, you would think they would want to use the best source material, and they did not do that, unfortunately. That being said, does it sound bad? No, it does not sound bad because those original DAT tapes do sound very good, but they could have been better. That's all I'm saying. So, this has been my, just kind of continued part 2 of the whole saga of the original 65 Beatles stereo mix and the 87 George Martin remixes. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I would love to know in the comments below what you think. Which one is your favorite as far as, is it the original 65 stereo mix or the 87 George Martin remix? And maybe there are some other big sound differences that I didn't talk about that you are very aware of and you want to comment in the comments below. I would love to read your comments about that. I also want to mention that, just honorable mention, my favorite vinyl pressing of Help happens to be this German pressing of the album. This happens to be a early 1970s stereo pressing of it, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Hands down the best one. These are getting harder and harder to find, by the way. You may be asking yourself, he hasn't had Help on the website in a long time. That's very true, because I've been trying to hunt these pressings down, but I've just been kind of coming up empty, or I've been finding ones that are just in not the best shape. So stay tuned. I am still working on picking up a German pressing of Help. So stay tuned for that on the website. Speaking of the website, by the way, don't forget to go check out my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com, where I have a bunch of records on there right now. And hey, maybe you'll find something that you like. So that's it for now. Stay tuned for more records. And by the way, I do have some new records I just posted today, including Led Zeppelin's album Houses of the Holy I just listed, and a bunch of other stuff is on there right now too. I kind of forget. I've been listing a bunch of stuff this past week, but stay tuned. Lots more records, and that's it. So bye for now.